City Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Peter Suchmann, and on today's episode of Kindest People, Kindest People on HMTV, here in the HMTC, the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, my special guest is Relle Sroka. Rochelle, by the way, is the daughter of Larry Gochman, who we just did a discussion with, a fascinating discussion. Please join me for a conversation about growing up with a father from difficult beginnings in Poland, and we're going to explore all sorts of topics involving MyHeritage and various other subjects. So, Rochelle, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for bringing your dad. What I wanted to start with was your earliest memories of learning about the Holocaust experiences of your father.
Okay, so my dad actually married my mom, who is Sephardic, and she was born in America. So as you can imagine, so we have an Ashkenazi Sephardic background.
Right.
And so my dad's family, we all know, are from the Holocaust and had survived, and how they survived. We had my grandmother, my grandfather, my father's side, and aunts and uncles. So we've always knew about it, but it was never really talked about. So I knew my grandmother, I knew my grandfather, and my uncle I knew was a fighter and he was a partisan. I knew that he married a woman who survived Auschwitz, and she had the numbers on her arm. My aunt and uncle who lived in Canada, I knew about them, but it wasn't a family discussion that we would have. And that didn't happen until a little later. But we always knew we were a child of a Holocaust survivor.
Right. So if I remember correctly, it was a 10th grade social studies assignment that brought this to the forefront.
I would say yes. So I had a social studies teacher who at the time went to Island Trees High School. And he said, go home and find an immigrant and interview an immigrant for our project. So I thought about it. I said, my dad's an immigrant, so let me interview my dad. So that night I sat down with my dad and I asked him, can you tell me the story I have to do for a project? So I took out my tape recorder and I put in the tape, and my dad opened up and he started to tell me the stories of what it was to survive, how they escaped into the forest, the stories of that happened in the forest, that happened to his family. And he just kept talking and telling me about the bridges they blew up and some of the really deep, deep stuff that had happened. And this 30-minute project turned into over 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I went to school the next day and I said to my teacher, I said, my dad spoke, but it's 2 hours worth. And he said, okay, now we are going to cancel whatever we were doing for the week, and we're going to be listening to Rochelle's her dad's story, and everyone has to sit and listen. And was
that a video or an audio?
And so it was all on a cassette tape.
Cassette tape.
So it was a cassette tape, and everyone sat there for the whole week, and it really was an eye-opener for the students because I did not really come from a very Jewish school district, so they're hearing the story firsthand and for the first time. And that really was my first documenting of my dad's story.
Right. I think it's fair to say that we're missing a lot of these stories of the resistance that happened. There's a misconception that Jews went to the slaughter and there was no resistance. And your father, we had a short period of time to discuss this, but we got the sense of there was a resistance, and they did the best they could under the most difficult circumstances. So when you made this tape, how did you process that? What was that like for you?
To me, that was the Holocaust. Yeah. I didn't have stories of the concentration camps, and it was always that we were the fighters, and we are going to fight back. And really instilled in us is my brothers and myself and the relatives and cousins is that you're always going to be a fighter, and you never follow the crowd. Always make sure you go the other way of the crowd. And that's how my thinking always went. I was always thinking of where would I go if anything ever happened? Where can I escape to? What route would I take? And I think that's part of being a child of a Holocaust survivor, is that you're always thinking this could happen again, and
Sure.
what could we do to fight back?
Were you lucky enough when you were growing up to have your parents nearby?
So yes, and so growing up, I had my dad's mom and dad would come over, spend holidays with us. We would go to their home. My uncles were part of our family. We were seeing them all the time for the holiday. My mom's side also blended very well. My mom actually learned how to speak Yiddish.
Really?
So she learned how to speak Yiddish to be able to speak to her mother-in-law.
I know that my sister, my brother, and I all studied German in school because my parents were always speaking in Yiddish or in German on the phone, and we never knew what they were saying. They were speaking to relatives. To this day, I had to memorize the poem The Lorelei in German. To this day, I can still recite The Lorelei. It's one of my few memories of high school. So you started out, tell us a little bit about your father was a kosher caterer.
Yes.
Interesting.
So my dad isn't only just a Holocaust survivor, but he also went into the Korean War.
Right.
So that piece of it. And then the connection of my mom and him meeting is my dad was a butcher. And my mom went to the kosher butcher to buy meat, and that's how they met. He saw a beautiful girl come in. So, of course, that's a beautiful love story for my parents. And so my dad was always involved in cooking and catering, and he took my mom up to the Catskill Mountains, and he worked in the kitchens there.
We used to go to the Kahansen Lodge.
The Kahansen. We did the Rowley Hotel and the Kutches. Those were our two places.
Yeah.
And then my dad is a kosher caterer. It was at Belrose Jewish Center, and he was a caterer. And so he grew up weddings and bar mitzvahs, and we were all working in the kitchen with him. So my dad is an amazing chef, and my mom is an amazing cook. Her Sephardic side, and my dad on his Ashkenazi side.
Best
so it was a great holiday meals together.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
So that was really instilled in us, was family get-togethers and family meals and holidays with both sets of grandparents.
Wonderful. So let's dig into that a little deeper. You said before you are the family historian. So how do you pull such an amazing story together? I know you said you used MyHeritage.
Right. So I realized very quickly on after I did the videotape that I would meet with my aunts and uncles, and they didn't want to be on video. So I knew I had to write things down and keep things documented. And someone always said, ask the person what ship they came over on, because if you ask them the name of the ship, then the history will come from there.
It'll flow.
Or the DP camp, but ask them a specific.
That's a displaced person
camp.
At
a displaced person's camp. So I asked my grandmother what ship she came on, and I am just an inquisitive person and decided to look it up. But back then we didn't have the internet and we didn't have those resources. So I went to Manhattan. I knew that they came over on a ship that came from Germany. It was the first ship to come over. So my research in me took me to the New York Public Library. And back then, if you kind of remember, we had to go through a microfiche.
Yes,
so I knew the date, and I knew the newspaper, and I went through the microfiche, and I found the newspaper, and I found the headlines, and I found the article, and I printed it through the microfiche, and that was my first documentation. I found the manifest of the ship.
Amazing.
So I see my dad's name, my uncle's names, my grandparents' names, their dates, where they came from, the addresses. So I started collecting. And I would meet relatives and say, what do you know and who do you know? And I just kept writing it down and writing it down. And as the internet grew, my ability to research became much larger.
Because your background is technology and education.
Because my background is
That's
in computer technology.
Yeah.
So certainly when the internet came out, and also just going to, when I went to Israel, I went to Yad Vashem, and I went to the archives and sat with them and went through the papers. So I knew that things were out there. We also knew that people were taking stories and collecting stories at the time. A lot of people heard of Spielberg, but actually Yale University did, they were documenting. So my dad was connected with Yale University, and he went to there, and they documented his story from beginning to the end, and it's still in their archives.
Is that an active archive that's still growing today?
As far as I know, it's an active archive.
Wow.
I know that you can look up Larry Gochman, and you will see that there's a 3-hour video of my dad.
Wonderful.
And of course, we all have it, and we have it on VHS, and we've put it onto DVD. So
Now you have to digitize it on a thumb drive.
digitize it. Well, we have it on a thumb drive. Luckily, I have a friend who helps me digitize everything onto video.
So important.
So knowing that there's information out there, and that was really the first, and I knew that I would be the collector of the newspaper, so I got a copy of the actual newspaper.
Wow.
So I still have that original newspaper that came out on May 22nd, the day after they arrived, and they didn't go into Ellis Island. They went through the New York Harbor.
Right.
So it was not the Ellis Island experience. So I try to keep everything and document it as I go through, which brought me to MyHeritage, which is a online family tree. So with that family tree, I have been collecting names of all of my grandmother, my father's mother, and all her siblings. So there are 7 of them, and those who perished. So I keep the family tree of that whole line, of my grandmother's whole line. And from that, we are able to fill in all the pieces of all the relatives across the board, to the point where the tree has now grown to the great-great-great-grandchildren of my grandparents' parents. So I do have them, and I have their names. So MyHeritage is the place where I keep my family tree, and people can help add to it.
Sure. And you collected DNA from various family members, or
we didn't do the DNA.
You didn't do the DNA.
No, we do the actual talking. We meet everybody, and my dad had a 90th birthday, and I printed out the entire family tree, and we had members of family who came to celebrate my dad's 90th, and I put it up on the board, and it went across the whole room, and everybody was given a pen and said, fill in the blanks, fill in where we're missing a person's name, and all the people who were at the affair were able to see where they are on the line. I'm the second cousin, I'm the first cousin, I'm the third cousin, and everyone was able to connect to each other. And my dad and my mom were really the glue of the family.
Sure.
And they keep the family to this day connected, and always made sure that we knew our cousins from all over the country, wherever we dispersed to. They made sure that we knew our cousins. So if you don't even talk to anybody at all for 10 years, you see them at a party, you know where you are on the tree, and you're connected. Which
is incredible. It's not easy to do. Now, we spoke earlier about an amazing video you found. Can we talk about that again?
So the piece that I spoke about is that you know the name of the ship, so now you can do research. And now the internet is flourishing, and all kinds of archives are online now. And we knew that, the ship's was videotaped. So there was a news company there, and they did a video. My brother one night put the name of the ship in to the internet, and he said, oh, look, there's a video of the arrival of the ship. And he's watching it, and and all of a sudden he sees my dad.
Oh, my goodness.
He says, my dad is 17 years old, and there's my dad hugging his relatives, and there's my grandmother, my uncle, my grandfather. It's 15 seconds of them arriving in America, meeting the family that fought for them to come here. And there they are, the tears, the joy, and it's 15 seconds that I don't think anyone ever gets, and we have it, and it's an amazing video to see because it's real.
Sure.
And I will say one of the things that a lot of people will say is, how come he's not in rags? How come, he just came out of the forest? How come he's not? The displaced persons camp is where my grandfather, my dad's father was a tailor, made them all suits to make sure that they came to America looking nice. So you spent a year there, you were, learned, you got your papers. So I'm just thrilled that little piece of history is with us. So now when we tell the story, you can end it with arrival and coming here.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Wow.
Really
You're
a treasure.
Very fortunate. Yeah, that is a family treasure. It was so important to your father to talk and to mention how important Israel is. Let's talk about Israel and the connections with your family, please.
So Israel has always been a very strong emotion in our family.
Right.
And then my father and my mom made trips to Israel back in the 70s and 80s. And my dad always knew he has family that immigrated to Israel. So that was a real strong connection that my father made. And so now, as we're getting older, my brother went to work on kibbutz for a little while when he became 18. And my father wanted us to all go to Israel and all have that connection to Israel. I went on a summer program and I met the relatives that were there.
Wonderful.
I stayed with them. And it really was like the next generation. So I met their children and we made the next generation connection. And my father and mother wanted us to always have Israel strong in our blood. And I've been there many, many times. My children all went to school there. They spent time there. They spent, I went after October 7th. We went, my husband and I, when we volunteered. And my dad felt very strongly that all his children needed to go to Israel and their wives. So he took the trip with them. And at 95 or 94, he went to Israel. And he just wanted to have them see the country, feel what he felt. And it was very important for him.
Yeah.
And of course, I've instilled that in my children. And our family has that very, very strong connection to it.
Right. So are your kids, grandkids involved in MyHeritage at all? Will they?
So MyHeritage is just really a standalone family
It's a
tree.
tool. It's a
Right.
tool.
It's a
Yeah.
tool.
Yeah.
And yes, they know it's there and they
Right.
know it. So what they would like for me to do, because they all want to give me projects on how we can keep the family history going,
Right.
they all named their children after relatives.
Sure.
So, okay, Mom put together a book so that Gabriel Max, we can have he's named after Uncle Murray, put together a whole history of Uncle Murray so that I can give it to my son who he's named after. Nice. So that's a new project that I will one day have to put together. But right now I'm the keeper of everything.
Right.
And so it's really, my daughter is involved in, she has a master's in Holocaust studies and she works for a Jewish foundation in Chicago. So she is very much into combating anti-Semitism, and she got a certificate from the university in Chicago. So, and she is pursuing her career on ways and pulling together how we can combat anti-Semitism of what's going on here in the United States, in the country.
Yeah.
And my children, my son and both my sons, it is a strong, they grab my father, they want to hear from grandpa and they want to hear his stories, but they have it instilled in them. And my nephews and my nieces
Right.
have a very, very strong instillment for my dad's story,
Sure.
the history, to fight and to be, combat anti-Semitism the way that we know that we have to.
Yeah, it's so important these days. We discussed just briefly, I made my parents' book with a book baby, bookbaby.com. It's a very simple process. You just send them PDFs, pictures for the front and back of the book. They create the ISBN and so forth, and it's done. And it's something you might want to look into.
It is something I am
It's so important to keep these stories alive.
I do have a website that because of that technical component of mine,
Right.
is that I did create a website, and I have a website where I take all the documents, everything that I have, recordings of my dad, and I post it on the website. So at least my children, my relatives, family members, cousins can all go there and at least get stories. So right now it's on a website and it's constantly being built. And I want to do it in a book, and I would like to take because when I took my dad to the different schools, so one of the pieces is back in like 2012, 2010, cousins were calling up and said, can your dad come and speak at my high school?
Yeah.
And one of them was North Shore Hebrew Academy.
Right.
So my cousin,
We would be shared.
Sarah,
I taught there for 10 years, so it's
he
amazing.
went to North Shore
Yeah.
Hebrew Academy,
Yeah.
and I said, well, if he's going to speak at North Shore Hebrew Academy, I want him to talk at Hank. Yeah. So where my children went to school at Hebrew Academy. So my dad went to the Hebrew Academy. But then I knew I needed a video photographer. So I had a video photographer follow us around whenever he went to speak. So it was all documented. Then I work in a public school at the Wheatley School, and a teacher was showing the movie Defiance. And I heard that she was showing the movie Defiance, and the movie Defiance is a very similar story of the partisans and family. And if the students were watching the movie, I said, I can have my dad come.
Sure.
And the high school allowed it, and I created an entire curriculum for them to be able to make it more interactive, not just hearing a lecture, but to be able to understand what it was like. So they saw the movie, then they met my dad, and then we went through almost 2 hours, and we had the video photographer with us. Students were broken into groups, the what if, how would you deal with this situation, and brought it to them in a real way so that they had to make decisions. What would you pack? What would you take with you? Yeah. What would you do if this happened to you? And it brought it to them on a personal level. They were able to watch the movie, see an actual survivor, and then think about those questions of what would I do in a situation like that. And that's my goal, is to make the people today, our youth today, to think really hard about history.
Right.
And what would you do in scenarios?
Yeah. It's amazing to think about that. The kids these days are so far removed if they don't have these presentations and these guest lecturers. I know that my father had his father's World War I suitcase. That was all he was allowed to leave with when he left on the kinder transport in 1938. And that suitcase is now traveling the world through the Leo Baeck Institute as part of a kinder transport exhibit. So I understand. Tell me more about how the kids respond. And you said you created a curriculum.
Right.
So can we unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. I think that it was because of the movie, which really helps you put it in perspective, because if you talk to students, they'll know a concentration camp, but they won't know the resistance piece of it.
Was Defiance based upon
another family that the Belsky family that went into the forest?
Were there newsreels, or was it?
No, they made a movie. You know, Lev Schreiber's
so it's not
in
a documentary.
No.
Okay.
So Lev Schreiber and Lev Schreiber, I could tell you, is my Uncle Murray, and the characters in the movie were similar.
Got it.
But it is really the ability for students to learn the story of resistance is to have some background knowledge and then hear the real stories from. But it's all based. The Defiance is all based on the family, the Belsky brothers, who, they're no longer. Their grandchildren are now telling the story.
Right.
But it is. For me, it's the most important piece that my dad does now is he goes around and he speaks. And the one thing that I will say is that he keeps very busy. As my dad is 97, he cooks for 100 people for kiddishes. He makes beautiful pieces of wood that are heirlooms for our family. He'll make an etro box. He just made a menorah. So my children have such strong connection of my dad's hands, creations that he makes.
So he sculpts out of wood.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, my father makes amazing art out of wood. And that's piece of it is that you have to keep busy. So for my dad to be able to put behind some of the stories is if you keep busy, your mind is always busy. So
we're going to wrap up now, but how does your dad respond after getting into some of the details of the stories? What is that like for him?
I think my dad right now, which we really did not want to have my dad speak, because after that incident when I had him talking, it does bring back a lot of his memory. And my mom really worked very, very hard to protect him and didn't want us to keep bringing it up. My mom has passed, and the organizations in Florida have really understood where my dad is, and when he goes to speak, that they need to call him, they need to stay in touch with him. But my dad is so proud to talk to students now.
I can see that, yeah.
And for him, that's what counts, is that he wants them to hear it from him
Right.
And he is okay with it.
Yeah.
As long as he's talking to students.
Sure.
Because then he gets the feedback from them,
Right.
wanting to meet him, shake his hand, say, I never met someone like you.
Yeah.
So I go to his events. I take my trip to Florida, and coming up, my daughter and her daughter, my granddaughter, I said it's ready for the next generation to hear grandpa's stories and great grandpa, and to document that she's there and she's able to be with him.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. All right. This has flown by. Rochelle, I thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter.
This was absolutely delightful. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of Kindest People, Kindest People on HMTV. I appreciate my guest, Rochelle, daughter of Larry Gochman, for sharing some insights on what it's like to grow up with a parent who has survived a very difficult childhood. Be sure to subscribe, share, and stay connected for more engaging conversations. Until next time, take care, be well, and humanity matters. So remember that, everybody. Humanity is so important. Thank you.